I should have known better than to let my best friend set me up on a blind date. But there I was, standing in front of the mirror in my tiny studio apartment, adjusting the collar of my only decent dress, a navy blue number I'd bought on clearance 3 years ago for my college graduation. "You look beautiful, Mia," I whispered to my reflection, trying to convince myself. My hands were trembling as I applied a final coat of mascara. At 26, I'd been so focused on paying off my student loans and keeping my head above water at my entry-level marketing job that dating had fallen completely off my radar. But Emma had been insistent. "He's perfect for you," she'd said over coffee last week. "He works in finance, drives a nice car, and he's looking for something serious. Just give it one chance." The restaurant she'd chosen was far fancier than anywhere I could afford. Azure Rose, one of those places where people went to celebrate promotions or anniversaries. I'd looked up the menu online and nearly fainted at the prices. A single appetizer cost more than I usually spend on groceries for a week. I arrived 15 minutes early, my stomach in knots. The hostess, dressed in an elegant black suit, looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain before checking her reservation list. "Name?" she asked coolly. "I'm meeting someone. Matthew Chun." The reservation might be under his name. Her expression shifted slightly. "Ah, yes. Mr. Chun. He's already here. Follow me." As we wound through the restaurant, I couldn't help but notice the other diners, women in designer dresses and men in tailored suits. I felt like a sparrow among peacocks, and my confidence, already fragile, began to crumble. Matthew was seated at a table near the window, scrolling through his phone. He looked exactly like his photos, handsome, well-groomed, expensive watch glinting under the ambient lighting. He glanced up as I approached, and something flickered across his face. Disappointment? Surprise? Whatever it wasn't positive. "Matthew," I said, extending my hand with what I hoped was a confident smile. "I'm Mia. It's nice to meet you." He shook my hand limply, his eyes already darting away. "Yeah. Hi. Have a seat." The first 30 minutes were painful. Matthew barely looked at me, answering my attempts at conversation with monosyllables while his attention remained glued to his phone. When the waiter came to take our order, I chose the cheapest entree on the menu, a pasta dish that still cost $45. "Is that all you're getting?" Matthew asked, his tone suggesting I'd somehow offended him. "I'm not that hungry," I lied. In truth, I'd skipped lunch to save money, and my stomach was growling. He ordered an expensive steak and a bottle of wine without asking if I wanted any. The waiter poured him a glass, and Matthew took a long sip, his eyes finally focusing on me. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, "Emma told me you work in marketing." "Yes. I'm at a small firm downtown. We do a lot of work with local businesses. How much do you make?" The question hit me like a slap. Excuse me? Your salary. What is it?" He flooded my cheeks. "That's a pretty personal question for a first date, don't you think?" He shrugged. "I like to know what I'm getting into. Emma said you went to State University." "Not exactly Harvard." I felt something twist in my chest. "State gave me a full scholarship. I graduated with honors." "Still State," he said dismissively. "Look, I'm just going to be honest with you. I make $200,000 a year. I drive a BMW. I own a condo in the financial district. I'm looking for someone who's on my level, you know? Someone who can keep up." "Keep up," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah. I mean, look at you. That dress is from what Target? Your shoes are scuffed. And Emma mentioned you live in some studio apartment in the bad part of town." He took another sip of wine, completely oblivious to how deeply his words were cutting me. "I'm 32. I don't have time to waste on someone who's still struggling. I need a woman who's successful, who has her life together. Someone I can introduce to my colleagues without being embarrassed." The pasta arrived, but I'd lost my appetite completely. Across from me, Matthew cut into his steak, still talking. "Don't get me wrong, it's admirable that you're trying. But some people just aren't meant for success, you know? Maybe you should consider a different career path. Something more realistic for your skill level." I stood up so abruptly that my chair scraped loudly against the floor. Several nearby diners turned to look. "Where are you going?" Matthew asked, annoyed. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice shaking. Thank you for making it crystal clear that I'm not good enough for you. Oh, come on, don't be dramatic, he said, rolling his eyes. I'm just being honest. You should appreciate that. Better to know now than waste both our time. The only thing I appreciate, I said, grabbing my purse, is learning exactly what kind of person you are. Enjoy your steak. I turned and walked toward the exit as quickly as I could without running, my vision blurring with tears. The hostess watched me pass with that same cool, judgmental expression. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the cool evening air, gasping like I'd been underwater. The parking lot was dimly lit, with only a few cars scattered across the pavement. I'd taken the bus here. I didn't own a car, but I couldn't bear the thought of waiting at the stop near the restaurant's entrance where Matthew or any of the other diners might see me. Instead, I walked to the far corner of the lot, behind a row of expensive vehicles, and finally let myself break down. The sobs came in great, heaving waves. It wasn't just about Matthew. It was about everything. The constant struggle to make rent, the student loans that never seemed to shrink, the way I had to choose between buying new work clothes and paying my electric bill. It was about being made to feel small and worthless, about being told I wasn't good enough, that I never would be. I leaned against a sleek black Mercedes, not caring if I left mascara stains on its pristine surface, and cried harder than I had in years. Excuse me. The voice was deep, gentle, and entirely unexpected. I jerked upright, hastily wiping at my face, and found myself looking at a man I hadn't heard approach. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair styled impeccably and wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my entire month's rent. But it was his eyes that caught me, dark, intelligent, and filled with something that looked like genuine concern. I'm so sorry, I stammered, stepping away from the car. I didn't mean to. Is this your car? I wasn't trying to damage it or anything, It's fine, he said quietly, holding up a hand. I'm not worried about the car. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was careful. I heard what they said to you in there. My blood ran cold. You what? My table was behind yours, he explained. I couldn't help but overhear your date. I'm sorry you had to experience that. The humiliation crashed over me in a fresh wave. It was bad enough that Matthew had torn me apart, but knowing that someone else had witnessed it, had heard every cruel word, made me want to disappear entirely. Please, I said, my voice breaking. I just want to go home. Of course, he said immediately. I didn't mean to intrude. He seemed to be choosing his words carefully. I wanted you to know that everything he said was wrong. Completely and utterly wrong. I let out a bitter laugh. You don't have to be nice to me. I know how I look right now. And I know what I am. Some broke girl in a cheap dress who can't even afford to eat at a fancy restaurant without panicking over the prices. Do you know who I am? He asked quietly. I blinked, confused by the question. Should I? A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. No, I suppose not. My name is Daniel Park. I'm the CEO of Nexus Corporation. The name meant nothing to me, and it must have shown on my face because his smile widened slightly. We're a technology and investment firm, he continued. We're actually the parent company of the investment firm where your date works. My eyes widened. Matthew works for you? Not directly. But yes, ultimately. He paused. I came to Azure Rose tonight to meet with some investors. They canceled at the last minute, but I decided to stay for dinner anyway. And then I found myself listening to one of my subsidiary employees treat someone like trash. I need to go, I said again, but my feet wouldn't move. There was something about Daniel Park that held me in place. Not fear, exactly, but a magnetic quality I couldn't quite name. How did you get here? He asked. Bus. It's getting late. Let me drive you home. No, I said quickly. I can't accept that. You've already been too kind and Mia. The way he said my name, he must have heard Matthew use it, was gentle but firm. It's late, you're upset, and I have a car. Please, let me do this one thing. I should have said no. I should have insisted on taking the bus, maintaining whatever shred of pride I had left. But I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and the thought of standing at a bus stop, alone with my thoughts, was unbearable. Okay, I whispered. Thank you. He gestured to the Mercedes I'd been leaning against, of course it was his car, and opened the passenger door for me. The interior smelled like leather and expensive cologne. I sank into the seat, feeling completely out of place. Daniel slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. Where to? I gave him my address, cringing as I did. He'd know exactly what kind of neighborhood I lived in, the kind with barred windows and graffiti on the walls. But he simply nodded and pulled out of the parking lot. For several minutes, we drove in silence. I stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past, trying to pull myself together. Can I tell you something? Daniel said finally. What? I grew up poor. Really poor. My mother was a single parent working 3 jobs to keep us fed. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with no heat. There were nights when she went hungry, so I could eat. I turned to look at him, surprised. I got into college on a scholarship, just like you, he continued. Worked my way through school, washing dishes, tutoring, whatever I could find. When I graduated, I had nothing but debt and a degree. No connections, no safety net. Just determination and a willingness to work harder than everyone else. But you made it, I said softly. I did. It took years. There were times I thought I'd never get out of that hole. But I kept pushing. He glanced at me briefly before returning his attention to the road. The point is, I know exactly what it's like to be where you are. And I know that the kind of person who judges you for it, who makes you feel small because you're struggling, isn't worth your tears. Matthew said I'm not successful, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. That I'm not on his level. That I never will be. Daniel's jaw tightened. Matthew Chun is a mediocre analyst who got his position because his father plays golf with one of our board members. He makes a decent salary because he was born with connections, not because he's particularly talented. You want to know what I see when I look at you? What? I asked, my voice barely audible. Someone who's fighting. Someone who's working hard and refusing to give up despite how difficult it is. That's worth more than all the BMWs and designer suits in the world. We pulled up in front of my building, and I felt the familiar embarrassment wash over me. The street light was broken, leaving the entrance in shadow. A group of teenagers loitered on the corner, their voices carrying through the night. Thank you for the ride, I said, reaching for the door handle. And thank you for everything you said. You didn't have to do that. Mia, wait. I paused, looking back at him. Daniel pulled out a business card and a pen from his jacket pocket. He wrote something on the back of the card and handed it to me. That's my personal cell phone number, he said. I want you to call me tomorrow. Why? I asked, confused. Because I have a proposition for you. My guard went up immediately. What kind of proposition? He smiled, and it transformed his face from handsome to genuinely warm. Nothing inappropriate, I promise. But I think you might be exactly who I've been looking for. We're launching a new community outreach initiative at Nexus, programs for underprivileged students, scholarship funds, mentorship opportunities. I need someone who understands that world, who's lived it, someone authentic who can help us make a real difference. You're offering me a job? I said, incredulous. Based on overhearing my disastrous date? I'm offering you an interview, he corrected. A chance. What you make of it is up to you. He paused. Your degree is in marketing, right? And Emma mentioned you were brilliant at school. I looked up your LinkedIn profile while you were composing yourself. I hope that's not too creepy. Your work speaks for itself, even if that Matthew couldn't see it. I stared at the card in my hand, my mind racing. I don't understand. Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me. Because I was you once, he said simply. And because someone took a chance on me when I was at my lowest. It changed my life. Maybe I can do the same for you. Tears pricked my eyes again, but this time they weren't from hurt or humiliation. I'll call you, I promised. Tomorrow. Good. He smiled again. And Mia, that dress looks lovely on you. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I climbed out of the car, clutching the business card like a lifeline, and watched as he drove away. When I finally made it up to my apartment, I collapsed on my bed and stared at the card for a long time. Daniel Park, CEO, Nexus Corporation. And below it, in neat handwriting, you're stronger than you know. DP. I called the next morning, my hands shaking as I dialed the number he'd written. Part of me expected it to go to voicemail, or worse, for him to have forgotten about me entirely in the light of day. But he answered on the second ring. Daniel Park. Mr. Park? It's Mia. From last night. Mia. The warmth in his voice was immediate and genuine. I'm glad you called. Are you free this afternoon? Say 2 o'clock. Yes, I can make that work. Perfect. Come to Nexus Tower. Top floor. Ask for me at reception. The call lasted less than a minute, but when I hung up, my heart was racing. I spent the next 4 hours preparing, researching Nexus Corporation, a tech giant worth billions, practicing answers to interview questions, and agonizing over what to wear. I settled on my best work outfit: black slacks, a cream blouse, and a blazer I'd found at a thrift store. Nexus Tower was a gleaming 40-story building in the heart of the financial district. The lobby alone was more impressive than any place I'd ever worked. Marble floors, modern art on the walls, and a reception desk that looked like something from a sci-fi movie. I'm here to see Mr. Park, I told the receptionist, trying to keep my voice steady. Mia Mia Torres. God, I'd almost given Matthew's last name. He's expecting me at 2. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 30s, typed something into her computer. Her eyebrows rose slightly. Mr. Park himself? Just one moment. She picked up a phone, spoke quietly, then smiled at me. His assistant will be right down. Please have a seat. 5 minutes later, I was in an elevator shooting toward the top floor. My escort, a friendly young woman named Sarah, made small talk about the weather, but I could barely focus. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped into what could only be described as a palace. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. The office space was open and modern, with employees working at sleek desks. But Sarah led me past all of that to a corner office with glass walls and a door that looked like it weighed a ton. Daniel was standing by the window, his back to me, phone pressed to his ear. He turned as Sarah knocked, and his face lit up when he saw me. I'll call you back, he said into the phone, then crossed the room in 3 long strides. Mia, thank you for coming. He shook my hand. His grip was firm but gentle, and gestured to a pair of chairs by a coffee table near the window. We sat, and for a moment, I forgot to be nervous. The view was breathtaking. Before we talk about the position, Daniel said, I want to apologize for last night. You apologize? You were the only kind person in that entire situation. I apologize for not intervening sooner. I should have said something to that man while it was happening. I shook my head. It wasn't your responsibility, but I appreciate that you cared. Always, he said softly, and something passed between us, a moment of understanding, of connection, that went beyond professional courtesy. Chapter 8. The Opportunity. Daniel spent the next hour outlining his vision. Nexus Corporation had reached a point where they could give back, and he wanted to create programs that would have helped someone like him, like us, when we were starting out. I need someone to head up this initiative, he said. Someone who can identify genuine need, who won't be fooled by sob stories but will recognize real potential. Someone who knows what it's like to fight for every opportunity. And you think that's me? I asked. Based on one conversation? I think you're exactly that, he said. But I also did my homework. I called Emma this morning. I hope you don't mind. She told me about your volunteer work at the community center, how you've been tutoring underprivileged kids on weekends, about the scholarship fund you tried to start at your old university, even though you barely have enough money to support yourself. He'd flooded my cheeks. Emma talks too much. Emma thinks the world of you. And after reading your portfolio, the campaigns you've created for those small businesses, the way you've maximized minimal budgets to create real impact, I think she's right. He named a salary that made my head spin. It was triple what I was making now. Enough to pay off my loans, to move to a safe neighborhood, to finally breathe. I can't accept this, I said, even as every fiber of my being screamed at me to say yes. It's too much. You don't even know if I can do the job. Then prove me right, Daniel said. Take the position. Show me what you're capable of. If it doesn't work out, we'll part ways professionally, and I'll write you a recommendation that will open doors anywhere you want to go. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're going to exceed every expectation. I looked into his eyes, those dark, intelligent eyes that had seen me at my lowest and hadn't flinched, and I made a decision. When do I start? The next 3 months were a whirlwind. I gave notice at my old job, found a decent apartment in a safe neighborhood, and dove headfirst into my new role at Nexus. Daniel had been right. This work was exactly what I was meant to do. I designed scholarship programs, created mentorship pipelines, and connected talented kids from struggling backgrounds with opportunities they'd never dreamed possible. Every day felt meaningful, purposeful. But more than the work, it was Daniel himself who made coming to the office something I looked forward to. We developed a rhythm, morning coffee in his office where we'd discuss our goals for the day, lunch meetings that often turned into 2-hour strategy sessions, evening check-ins before we both headed home. He never treated me like an employee. He treated me like an equal, a partner in this mission we'd undertaken together. He sought my opinions, trusted my judgment, and celebrated every success as if it were his own. Slowly, something shifted between us. The professional boundaries we'd carefully maintained began to blur. A hand on my shoulder that lingered a moment too long. Eye contact that held deeper meaning. Conversations that veered into personal territory. His failed engagement 3 years ago, my disastrous dating history, our shared love of old movies and obscure indie music. "You're staring," I said one evening, catching him watching me as I reviewed applications at the conference table. "Sorry," he said, but he didn't look away. "I was just thinking about how far you've come since that night in the parking lot. Thanks to you." "No," he said firmly. "Thanks to you. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it and built something incredible." I set down my pen, my heart racing. "Daniel." "Yes." "Why did you really offer me this job?" "The truth." He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was low and sincere. "Because when I saw you crying in that parking lot, something in me broke. I saw myself in you, the pain, the determination, the refusal to give up despite everything. And I thought, if I could help you, if I could give you the chance no one gave me until it was almost too late, then maybe all the struggles I went through would mean something." "And now?" I asked softly. "What do you see now?" He stood and crossed to where I sat, kneeling beside my chair so we were eye level. "Now I see the strongest, most inspiring person I've ever met. I see someone who's changed not just lives through this program, but changed me. Made me remember why I started this company in the first place. Made me feel." He paused, his hand coming up to gently touch my cheek. "Made me feel things I'd given up on feeling." My phone buzzed on the table, breaking the moment. I glanced at the screen and felt my stomach drop. It was a message from Emma. "OMG, did you see? Matthew got fired from his job. Something about inappropriate conduct and misuse of company resources. Karma is real." Daniel must have seen the change in my expression. "What is it?" I showed him the message. He read it, then looked up at me with something unreadable in his eyes. "Did you?" I started to ask. "I did," he said simply. "After that night, I had HR review his files. Turns out your date wasn't his first incident of inappropriate behavior. He'd harassed several female colleagues, made similar comments about their backgrounds and appearance. The company had been building a case, but his father's connections had protected him. I removed those protections. Because of me, because it was the right thing to do. But yes, you inspired me to finally take action." He smiled slightly. "Consider it my revenge on your behalf. I should have felt vindicated, triumphant even. But instead, I just felt free. Free from the memory of that night, from the words that had cut so deep." "I don't think about him anymore," I said quietly. "Not the way I did. You know what I think about." "Tell me." "I think about how lucky I am that he was such a jerk. Because if he hadn't been, I would never have been crying in that parking lot. I would never have met you. My entire life would be different." "Mia," Daniel said, his thumb tracing my cheekbone. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to know I mean it with complete sincerity. Okay, I'm falling in love with you. I have been since the moment you stood up to that man in the restaurant, since I watched you walk away with your head held high even though you were falling apart inside. And every day since has only made it worse, or better, depending on how you look at it." My breath caught. "Daniel, I know this is complicated. I'm your boss, technically, and there are rules and protocols we should probably be following. But I can't keep pretending that this is just professional. That you're just an employee. Because you're so much more than that. You're everything. I reached up and placed my hand over his, pressing it more firmly against my cheek. You want to know a secret? Always. That night, when you drove me home and gave me your card, I didn't think I'd ever hear from you again. I thought you were just being kind to some pathetic girl who couldn't even get through a date without breaking down. But I kept that card. I looked at it every single day until I called you. And I made myself a promise. What promise? That if you really gave me this chance, I'd make the most of it. I'd prove to you, and to myself, that I was worth believing in. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about proving anything. It became about wanting to be worthy of you. Of this kindness you showed me when you had absolutely no reason to. Mia, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You were always worthy. You just needed someone to see it. Then see this, I said, and I kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, testing the waters of this new territory we were entering. But then his hand slid into my hair, and I leaned into him, and the kiss deepened into something that felt inevitable, like we'd been heading toward this moment since that night in the parking lot. When we finally pulled apart, both breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against mine. This is going to be complicated, he said. I know. People will talk. They'll say I gave you special treatment, that you slept your way to success. Let them talk, I said firmly. I know the truth. You know the truth. I earned this position, and everything I've accomplished here has been on my own merit. Damn right you have, he said, pride evident in his voice. And I'll defend that truth to anyone who questions it. We stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped up in each other, the city lights twinkling below us. And I thought about that girl who'd been crying in a parking lot 3 months ago, broken and humiliated, convinced she'd never be enough. She'd been wrong. She'd always been enough. She just needed to see herself through the right eyes. Not those of some small-minded man who measured worth in dollar signs and designer labels, but through her own eyes. Through the eyes of someone who saw her strength, her resilience, her heart. Thank you, I whispered against Daniel's shoulder. For what? For hearing what they said to me in there. For not just walking away. For giving me a chance to prove myself. For everything. He pulled back enough to look at me, his eyes shining with something that looked a lot like love. Thank you for taking that chance. Thank you for being brave enough to try. And thank you, he said, pressing a soft kiss to my forehead, for being exactly who you are. 6 months later, I stood in that same restaurant, Azure Rose, but this time, I wasn't wearing a cheap clearance dress or scuffed shoes. I was wearing confidence, success, and yes, a beautiful designer dress that I'd bought with my own hard-earned money. Daniel sat across from me, his hand holding mine across the table, and I smiled at the waiter who'd witnessed my humiliation the first time I'd been here. We'd like to start with the lobster, Daniel said, but he was looking at me, not the menu. And a bottle of your best champagne. We're celebrating. Celebrating what, sir? The waiter asked politely. Daniel raised my hand to his lips, kissing my knuckles, his eyes never leaving mine. The fact that I found the love of my life in a parking lot, crying over the worst date of her life. And tomorrow, I'm going to ask her to marry me. My heart stopped. Tomorrow, I breathed. Tomorrow, he confirmed. I wanted to give you tonight to really think about it. To be sure this is what you want. Because once you say yes, and I'm really hoping you'll say yes, I'm never letting you go. I thought about everything that had brought us to this moment. The pain, the struggle, the humiliation that had once felt like the end of my world. And I realized it hadn't been the end at all. It had been the beginning. Tomorrow, I said, tears streaming down my face, but happy tears this time, joy tears. Ask me tomorrow. But spoiler alert. I leaned across the table, not caring who was watching. The answer is going to be yes. And as he kissed me right there in that expensive restaurant, I realized something profound. Sometimes you have to be broken down completely to be rebuilt into something stronger. Sometimes the worst moments of your life are actually doorways to the best ones. I'd left that blind date crying in the parking lot, convinced I was a failure. But I'd been found by the CEO who'd heard what they said to me in there, and he'd shown me a truth I'd never forget. I was never the problem. I was always the prize. I just needed to wait for someone who could see it,